The howl pierced the night, freezing my blood and stopping me dead in my tracks. It wasn't the cry of a normal wolf. This was something else entirely, something primal, ancient, and utterly terrifying. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, as the echo of that bone-chilling sound reverberated through the dense Ozark forest. My name is Daniel, and I'm about to tell you about the night that changed my life forever. A night that plunged me into a waking nightmare, face to face with a creature I thought only existed in myths and horror stories. This is the tale of my encounter with the Werewolf of Missouri. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a chance to get away from the hustle and bustle of city life, to reconnect with nature and find some peace in the wilderness. I had no idea I was walking into a trap set by a predator beyond my wildest imagination. The day had started normally enough. I'd driven out to a remote part of the Mark Twain National Forest, eager to spend a few days hiking and enjoying the solitude. As I set up my tent in a small clearing, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I should have taken that as a warning sign, but I brushed it off. Fool that I was, I convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. As night fell, I built a small fire and settled in, gazing up at the stars peeking through the canopy of trees above. That's when I heard it, the howl. It started low, almost like a moan, before rising to a pitch that sent shivers down my spine. It was close, too close. I scrambled to my feet, frantically searching the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. The woods seemed to press in around me, shadows dancing and shifting in ways that defied natural explanation. My instincts screamed at me to run, but where? I was miles from the nearest road, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, I heard something moving through the underbrush. Heavy footfalls, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves. Whatever it was big. And then I saw it, a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight, glowing in unnatural amber. They were set too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. As I watched, transfixed by terror, a shape emerged from the shadows. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Covered in thick, matted fur, with an elongated snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its hands, and if you could call them that, ended in wicked claws that looked like they could tear through flesh and bone with ease. It was a werewolf. There was no other word for it. A monster straight out of legend, standing mere yards away from me. Every fiber of my being screamed in protest at the impossibility of what I was seeing, but there was no denying the reality of the creature before me. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other. I could see the intelligence in those inhuman eyes, the hunger, the raw animal fury barely held in check. And then with a snarl that turned my legs to jelly, it charged. I ran like I've never run before in my life, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction or safety. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step. But I didn't dare slow down. I could hear it behind me, moving with a speed and grace that defied its bulk. The sound of its breathing, heavy and ragged, seemed to fill the entire forest. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in protest, but I pushed on. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. In my panic, I lost all sense of direction. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, and I realized with growing horror that I was hopelessly lost. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling and bouncing off rocks and fallen logs. When I finally came to a stop, I found myself at the bottom of a ravine, battered and bruised but miraculously still alive. I lay there gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Then from somewhere above came that terrible howl again. It was closer now, filled with a mixture of rage and triumph that chilled me to my very core. Frantically, I looked around for somewhere to hide. My eyes fell on a narrow opening in the rock face nearby, a cave, barely visible in the gloom. Without thinking, I scrambled towards it, squeezing through the tight entrance and pressing myself as far back into the darkness as I could go. Outside, I could hear the werewolf moving around, sniffing the air. It knew I was close. I held my breath, praying to whatever gods might be listening that it wouldn't find me. The seconds ticked by like hours as I listened to it prowling just outside my hiding place. And then, silence. Had it given up? Had it lost my trail? I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in terror, before I finally worked up the courage to peek out of the cave. The ravine was empty, no sign of the creature. But as I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the soft earth near the cave entrance, was a single massive paw print. It had known exactly where I was. It had let me hide, let me think I was safe. This wasn't just a hunt, it was playing with me. I retreated back into the cave, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I couldn't stay here forever, but I couldn't risk going back out there either. The werewolf was still out there, waiting, hunting, and I was its prey. As the night wore on, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, jolting awake at every sound. Each time I expected to see those glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness, those razor-sharp teeth bared in a horrific grin. But the creature didn't return. When the first light of dawn finally began to filter into the ravine, I cautiously emerged from my hiding place. The forest was quiet, but not with the unnatural stillness of the night before. I could hear birds chirping, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Had it all been a nightmare? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation? But then I saw the paw print again, and I knew it had been real. All of it. I had come face to face with a monster, and by some miracle I had survived. I stumbled through the woods, battered, exhausted, and still terrified. It took hours, but I finally found my way back to my campsite. Everything was as I had left it, untouched. It was as if the events of the night had never happened. As I packed up my gear with shaking hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. I kept expecting to turn around and see the werewolf standing there, ready to finish what it had started. The drive back to civilization was a blur. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away from the forest, surrounded by the comforting signs of human habitation. But even then, the memory of what I had seen haunted me. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a product of my imagination, a vivid nightmare brought on by too many horror movies and an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen something that night in the Ozarks, something that shouldn't exist. And worse, it had seen me. I've never gone back to those woods. I can't bring myself to set foot in a forest anymore, not even in broad daylight. The thought of being surrounded by trees, of what might be lurking in the shadows, is more than I can bear. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I hear it, that howl carried on the wind, a sound that doesn't belong in this world. And I know that somewhere out there, in the dark woods of Missouri, the werewolf is still hunting, waiting. And I can't help but wonder, was I allowed to escape that night? Or was I let go, marked, destined to live the rest of my life in fear, always looking over my shoulder? One thing I know for certain, the next time I hear that howl, it will be the last thing I ever hear. Because the Werewolf of Missouri doesn't let its prey escape twice. So if you're ever in the Ozarks and you hear a howl that makes your blood run cold, don't try to be brave. Don't try to investigate. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. And pray that it's not already too late. Because once the werewolf has your scent, it never forgets, and it never ever gives up. The weeks following my terrifying encounter in the Ozark woods were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, hunted. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I knew I needed help, but who would believe me? Who could I possibly turn to with a story about werewolves and monsters in the Missouri wilderness? In desperation, I started researching. I scoured the internet for any mention of similar encounters, any hint that what I had experienced wasn't unique. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories, whispered tales passed down through generations of Ozark locals. Stories of a creature that stalked the deepest, darkest parts of the forest. A beast that was neither man nor wolf, but something in between. Something ancient and evil. The details varied, but certain elements remained consistent. The unnatural howl that froze the blood. The glowing amber eyes. The impossible speed and strength. And always the sense that the creature was toying with its victims, prolonging the hunt for its own twisted pleasure. One account in particular caught my attention. It was from a trapper who claimed to have encountered the beast in the 1930s. He described how it had stalked him for days, always staying just out of sight, leaving signs of its presence to torment him. Massive paw prints outside his cabin, claw marks on trees that no natural animal could have made, the constant feeling of being watched. The trapper's story ended abruptly, with no explanation of how he had escaped or what had become of him afterward. But the similarities to my own experience were undeniable. This thing, whatever it was, had been haunting these woods for decades, maybe even centuries. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more recent reports. Hikers gone missing in areas where they shouldn't have been able to get lost. Campers found torn to shreds in ways that defied explanation. And always in the background, rumors of something inhuman stalking the forest. The more I learned, the more I became convinced that my encounter hadn't been a fluke. I hadn't just stumbled into the werewolf's territory by chance. It had been waiting for me, waiting for someone to wander into its hunting grounds, someone it could terrorize and pursue for its own sick amusement. But why had it let me go? The question haunted me. Was it simply prolonging the game, knowing it could find me again whenever it wanted? Or was there some other, more sinister purpose behind my survival? I found myself growing paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows, bought security cameras for my home, but deep down, I knew that if the creature decided to come for me, no amount of precautions would save me. Nights were the worst. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in those woods, running for my life. The sound of the werewolf's breathing hot on my heels. I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I could hear that bone-chilling howl in the distance. My work suffered. My relationships crumbled. Friends and family grew concerned about my increasingly erratic behavior. But how could I explain? How could I make them understand the terror that now ruled my life? In a desperate attempt to find some peace, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator. I half expected to be laughed off or dismissed as a crackpot, but to my surprise, she listened to my story with rapt attention. When I finished, she sat back with a grim expression. "You're not the first," she said quietly, "and I'm afraid you won't be the last." She went on to explain that she had been tracking reports of the creature for years. According to her research, the werewolf, or whatever it truly was, had been a part of Ozark folklore for centuries. Native American tribes had warned the first European settlers about a shape-shifting beast that hunted in the deepest parts of the forest. Those who dismissed the warnings often disappeared, never to be seen again. But why, I asked, desperate for any explanation that might help me make sense of what had happened. Why does it do this? Why didn't it just kill me when it had the chance? The investigator's answer sent a chill down my spine. "From what I've pieced together," she said, "it feeds on fear as much as flesh. The terror of its victims, the paranoia and dread that follow an encounter, that's what truly sustains it. You're not just prey, you're a source of nourishment." The idea that my fear, my sleepless nights and constant anxiety were somehow feeding this monster was almost too much to bear. But it made a twisted kind of sense. The way it had toyed with me, letting me think I had escaped only to leave that paw print as a reminder of its presence. It wasn't just hunting, it was cultivating its food source. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling more helpless than ever. "How do I stop it?" The investigator's face was grim. "I don't know if you can," she admitted. "This thing has been around for a long time. It survived every attempt to hunt it down or drive it out. The best advice I can give you is to stay away from the forest. Don't give it a chance to finish what it started." But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. The werewolf had my scent now. It knew who I was, where I lived. The forest was its home, but there was nothing stopping it from leaving those woods if it really wanted to find me. As I left the investigator's office, I felt a mix of relief and renewed terror. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that someone else believed me, but terror at the confirmation that the nightmare was real and that it might never truly be over. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I went through the motions of work and social interactions, but always with one eye on the shadows, always listening for that telltale howl. I moved to a new apartment in the heart of the city, as far from any wooded areas as I could get. I changed my routines, varied my routes to and from work, anything to make it harder for the creature to track me down if it decided to come looking. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there, waiting, watching, feeding on the constant fear that now defined my existence. Sometimes on nights when the moon is full and the wind carries the distant sound of howling, I find myself wondering if it wouldn't have been better to have died that night in the forest. At least then it would be over. This constant state of dread, of looking over my shoulder and jumping at shadows, is its own kind of living death. But then I think of all the other potential victims out there. People who might wander into those woods, unaware of the horror that awaits them. And I know that I have to stay alive, have to keep telling my story, because maybe, just maybe, it might save someone else from experiencing the terror that now rules my life. So I'll keep watching the shadows. I'll keep listening for that howl. And I'll keep warning anyone who will listen about the monster that lurks in the Missouri wilderness. The werewolf of the Ozarks, a creature of nightmare-made flesh. Because someone has to stand against the darkness, even if it's just by shining a light on it and saying, beware, here there be monsters. And to anyone reading this who might be planning a trip to the Ozarks, I beg you, stay on the marked trails. Don't go into the deep woods. And if you hear a howl that makes your blood run cold and your heart stop in your chest, don't try to be brave. Don't try to investigate. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. And pray that you're faster than what's chasing you. Because once the werewolf has your scent, it never forgets. And it never ever gives up. As the months turned into years, I found myself trapped in a limbo of constant vigilance and creeping dread. The memory of that night in the Ozarks never faded. If anything, it seemed to grow sharper, more vivid with each passing day. The glowing amber eyes, the inhuman snarl, the paw print left as a calling card. These images were burned into my mind, haunting my every waking moment and invading my dreams. I tried to move on, to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, anything to keep my mind occupied and away from the shadows that seemed to lurk at the edges of my vision. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living on borrowed time, that someday, somehow, the werewolf would come to finish what it had started. My paranoia began to take on a life of its own. I became obsessed with security, installing elaborate alarm systems in my home, carrying multiple cell phones in case one failed, even taking self-defense classes in a futile attempt to prepare myself for an encounter I knew I could never truly be ready for. I avoided wooded areas like the plague, breaking out in a cold sweat if I so much as drove past a cluster of trees. Friends and family grew increasingly concerned about my behavior. They tried to convince me to seek professional help, to talk to a therapist about my traumatic camping experience. But how could I explain? How could I make them understand that the monster under the bed was real, and it was hunting me? In my darkest moments, I considered ending it all. At least then, the waiting would be over. The constant fear, the sleepless nights, the jump at every unexpected sound. It would all finally stop. But something held me back, a stubborn determination to not let the creature win, to not give it the satisfaction of breaking me completely. And then, on a crisp autumn evening, 3 years after my encounter in the Ozarks, everything changed. I was walking home from work, taking my usual circuitous route through busy city streets, when I felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched that I had grown all too familiar with. But this time it was different, more intense, more immediate. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the crowded sidewalks. Nothing seemed out of place. just the usual rush of commuters heading home for the day. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. As I turned a corner onto a slightly less busy side street, I saw it. Just a glimpse, a flash of movement in an alleyway up ahead. But it was enough. I knew with bone-deep certainty that my time had run out. The werewolf had found me. For a moment I stood frozen in place, my mind racing. Should I run? Try to lose it in the crowd? But I knew from bitter experience just how fast and relentless this creature could be. There would be no outrunning it, not this time. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, ready to call for help. But who would I even call? The police? They'd never believe me, and by the time they arrived, it would be far too late. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, I heard it. That low, rumbling growl that had haunted my nightmares for years. It was close, too close. I turned slowly, my whole body shaking, to face the alleyway. And there it was, emerging from the shadows like something out of a horror movie. The werewolf, my werewolf. The monster that had been hunting me all this time. It looked exactly as I remembered, massive, covered in matted fur, with those terrifying amber eyes fixed directly on me. But there was something different this time. A sense of anticipation, excitement, as if it had been looking forward to this moment just as much as it had been dreading it. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Me, rooted to the spot by terror. The werewolf, its massive chest heaving with each breath, claws flexing at its sides. I waited for it to charge to finally end this years-long game of cat and mouse, but it didn't move. Instead, to my utter shock, it spoke. "Daniel," it growled, my name sounding alien and wrong, coming from its inhuman muzzle. "We meet again." I felt my knees go weak. This couldn't be happening. The creature I'd encountered in the woods had been animalistic, driven by instinct and hunger. This was something else entirely. "What?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you?" The werewolf's muzzle twisted in what I could only describe as a grin, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I am what you fear most," it said. "I am the shadow in the woods, the howl in the night. I am the primal terror that lurks in the darkest corners of your mind." It took a step forward, and I instinctively backed away. But I knew there was nowhere to run. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and in some sick way, anticipating for years. "Why?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Why did you let me go that night? Why wait all this time?" The creature's eyes seemed to glow brighter as it regarded me. "Because, Daniel, fear is the sweetest meat of all. Your terror, your paranoia, your constant dread. It has nourished me these past years, made me stronger. And now, finally, it is time to feast." With a snarl that turned my blood to ice, it lunged forward. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end, for the tearing of claws and the snapping of teeth. But the pain never came. Instead, I felt a rush of wind, heard the screech of tires and the blaring of a horn. My eyes flew open just in time to see a city bus swerve to avoid the massive shape that had leapt into the street. There was a sickening thud, a yelp of pain and surprise, and then silence. I stood there frozen in disbelief as a crowd began to gather around the bus. Murmurs of confusion and shock rippled through the onlookers. "Did you see that? What was it? Some kind of animal?" Cautiously, I approached the scene, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. And there, lying broken and twisted on the asphalt, was the werewolf. Or rather, what was left of it. As I watched, its form seemed to shimmer and shift. The fur receded, the muzzle shortened, the massive frame shrunk down. Within moments, all that remained was the battered body of a man, an ordinary-looking man, middle-aged, unremarkable in every way. The police arrived, then paramedics. I gave my statement in a daze, describing what I had seen as a large animal, maybe a wolf or a dog, that had run into the street. I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. Who would believe me? As they loaded the body into an ambulance, one of the paramedics turned to his partner with a puzzled expression. "Weirdest thing," he said, This guy's got some kind of birth defect or something. Extra teeth, all sharp as razors. I felt a chill run down my spine at those words. Even in death, the creature wasn't fully human. A part of it, however small, had retained its monstrous nature. In the days that followed, I scoured the news for any mention of the incident, but there was nothing beyond a brief report of a pedestrian struck and killed by a bus. No mention of anything unusual about the victim, no follow-up investigations. It was as if the world was determined to forget, to paper over the cracks in reality that the werewolf's existence had revealed. But I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes, heard its voice, felt the terror of being hunted by something that should not exist. And even though the immediate threat was gone, I knew I would never truly be free of it, because now I understood something that chilled me to my very core. The werewolf hadn't been unique. It hadn't been the only one of its kind. It had been a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding, a world where monsters were real and the things that went bump in the night had teeth and claws. I still avoid the woods. I still start at unexpected sounds and peer into shadows, half expecting to see glowing amber eyes staring back at me. But now my fear isn't just for myself. It's for everyone who doesn't know, who goes about their lives blissfully unaware of the horrors that lurk just out of sight. So I keep telling my story, to anyone who will listen, to those who stumble across obscure forms or whispered tales of things that cannot be. Because knowledge, however terrifying, is power. And in a world where werewolves can walk among us, where ancient evils can hunt us through city streets, we need all the power we can get. To those reading this, I say, be vigilant, be aware. And if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, with the moon high and a chill running down your spine, remember my tale. Remember that the monsters are real and they're always, always hungry. In the aftermath of my final confrontation with the werewolf, I found myself adrift in a world that suddenly seemed both more terrifying and more wondrous than I had ever imagined. The creature was gone, its reign of terror over, but the knowledge it had brought with it, the realization that there were things in this world beyond human understanding, that remained, burning in my mind like a fever dream I couldn't shake. For a while I tried to convince myself that it had all been some kind of shared delusion, that the stress and fear of that night in the Ozarks had warped my perception, made me see things that weren't there. But I couldn't deny the reality of what had happened on that city street. The werewolf had been real. It had hunted me, spoken to me, and in the end, it had died a very human death. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself drawn deeper into the world of the unexplained. I scoured the internet for reports of similar encounters, reached out to cryptozoologists and paranormal investigators, even traveled to small towns with histories of strange sightings and unexplained disappearances. What I found both terrified and fascinated me. There were stories from all over the world, spanning centuries, of creatures that defied rational explanation. Shapeshifters in the forests of Eastern Europe, skinwalkers stalking the deserts of the American Southwest, sea monsters lurking in the depths of remote lakes, and werewolves. So many stories of werewolves. But as I dug deeper, I began to notice patterns, similarities in the accounts that went beyond simple folklore or urban legends. The way the creatures toyed with their victims, prolonging the hunt. The sense of intelligence behind their actions, a cruel, calculating nature that went far beyond mere animal instinct. And always, always the fear. The bone-deep terror that seemed to radiate from these beings, affecting everyone and everything around them. It was during my research that I came across an obscure text, a translation of an ancient manuscript that claimed to reveal the true nature of these creatures. According to this document, what we called werewolves, and indeed all manner of shapeshifters and monsters, were not separate species or the result of curses or infections. They were something far more terrifying. They were us, or rather what we could become. The manuscript spoke of a primal force that existed in all living things, a connection to the raw, untamed power of nature itself. In most humans, this force lay dormant, buried under layers of civilization and rational thought. But in some, whether through trauma, ritual, or simple quirk of genetics, this force could be awakened. Those who underwent this awakening found themselves transformed, not just physically but mentally and spiritually as well. They gained incredible powers: strength, speed, the ability to heal from almost any wound. But they also lost something essential: their humanity, their connection to the world of men. Instead, they became creatures of pure instinct and hunger. Predators in the truest sense of the word, and like all predators, they needed to feed. But it wasn't just flesh they craved. According to the manuscript, these beings fed on emotions: fear, pain, despair. These were their true sustenance. The terror of their victims nourished them, made them stronger, more powerful. As I read this, I felt a chill run down my spine. I remembered the werewolf's words to me on that final night: "Fear is the sweetest meat of all." It hadn't been speaking metaphorically, it had been literal truth. The more I learned, the more I began to see the world in a new light. Every unexplained disappearance, every tale of a monster in the woods or a beast stalking city streets, was this the work of these awakened beings? Were they moving among us even now, hiding in plain sight, feeding on our fear and pain? But with this terrifying knowledge came a spark of hope. Because if these creatures had once been human, if this primal force existed in all of us, then perhaps there was a way to fight back, to awaken our own inner strength without losing our humanity in the process. I threw myself into this new quest with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I studied ancient texts, traveled to remote monasteries, sought out practitioners of esoteric arts from around the world. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to put together a picture of what might be possible. There were techniques, meditations, and exercises that could help tap into that primal force without being consumed by it. Ways to strengthen the body and mind, to heighten the senses and reflexes to almost superhuman levels. It wasn't easy. The training was grueling, both physically and mentally. There were times when I felt I was teetering on the edge of madness, when the call of that raw, untamed power threatened to overwhelm me. But I persevered, because I knew that somewhere out there, others like my werewolf were still hunting, still feeding on the fear and pain of innocent victims, and someone had to stand against them. It took years, but finally I felt ready. My body was honed to peak physical condition. My mind was sharp, my senses attuned to the world around me in ways I had never thought possible. I could feel the pulse of that primal force within me, controlled but ever present, ready to be called upon when needed. And so I set out on a new journey, not as prey, but as hunter. I traveled the country, following reports of strange sightings and unexplained attacks. Sometimes I found nothing. Sometimes I found all too much. I've faced things that would shatter most people's sanity, creatures that defy description, that shouldn't be able to exist in our world. I've felt the mind-numbing terror that is their greatest weapon, the paralytic fear that turns victims into easy prey. But I've also triumphed. I've saved lives, stopped hunts before they could begin, sent these monsters fleeing back into the shadows they came from. It's not an easy life. The nightmares never really go away, and there's always the fear that one day I'll face something I can't handle, that I'll become the very thing I'm fighting against. But I keep going, because someone has to. Someone has to stand between the darkness and the light, to protect those who don't even know they need protecting. To those reading this, I say again, be vigilant, be aware. The world is stranger and more dangerous than you can imagine, but it's also full of wonder and potential. We all have that primal force within us, that connection to something greater than ourselves. The key is learning to use it without being consumed by it. And if you ever find yourself alone on a dark night, with the shadows seeming to move of their own accord and a chill running down your spine, remember this: you are not helpless. You are not prey. You have strength within you that you've never even begun to tap. Stand your ground, face your fears, and know that somewhere out there, there are others like me, watchers in the night, guardians against the darkness. We're out there, and we're hunting the hunters. As the years passed, my life as a hunter of the supernatural became a solitary, often thankless existence. The world at large remained blissfully unaware of the horrors that lurked in the shadows, and those few who did believe often regarded me with a mixture of fear and pity. But I couldn't stop. The knowledge of what was out there, the memory of that night in the Ozarks and the final confrontation in the city drove me ever onward. My travels took me to the far corners of the world. I stalked through the mist-shrouded forests of Eastern Europe, following tales of ancient vampires and restless spirits. I trekked across the sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest, where skinwalkers were said to prey on unwary travelers. I even ventured into the heart of the Amazon rainforest, seeking the truth behind legends of shape-shifting jaguars and river monsters. Each encounter, each confrontation with the unknown, left its mark on me. Scars, both physical and mental, accumulated. There were nights when the weight of what I had seen and done threatened to crush me, when the loneliness of my chosen path seemed too much to bear. But I persevered, because I knew that for every monster I stopped, for every innocent life I saved, the world became a little bit safer, a little bit brighter. As time went on, I began to notice changes in myself. My senses, already heightened by years of training and experience, became even more acute. I could smell the faintest trace of a werewolf's passage, hear the whisper of a ghost's presence in an abandoned building. My reflexes sharpened to superhuman levels, allowing me to dodge attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. At first, these changes thrilled me. They made me a more effective hunter, better equipped to face the horrors that lurked in the dark. But as they continued to develop, a creeping fear began to take hold. Was I becoming something other than human? Was I, in my relentless pursuit of monsters, turning into one myself? These questions haunted me, driving me to seek out answers in ancient texts and forgotten lore. I delved deeper into the nature of the primal force that powered the supernatural, hoping to understand the changes happening within me. What I discovered both terrified and exhilarated me. The line between human and monster, I learned, was far more blurred than I had ever imagined. The same primal force that created werewolves and vampires could also elevate humans to something beyond their normal limitations. But the risk of losing one's humanity in the process was ever present. I stood at a crossroads. I could continue as I was, fighting a never-ending battle against the darkness while constantly fearing what I might become. Or I could embrace the changes, push myself further, and become something new. Something that could truly stand against the horrors of the night. In the end, the choice was clear. I had come too far, seen too much to turn back now. If becoming something more than human was the price I had to pay to protect the innocent, then so be it. And so, I embarked on a new journey. Not just as a hunter of monsters, but as a bridge between two worlds. I sought out others like myself, humans who had glimpsed the truth of what lurked in the shadows and chosen to fight back. Together, we formed a network, a secret society dedicated to protecting humanity from supernatural threats. We called ourselves the Night Watch. Our battles took us to the darkest corners of the earth and beyond. We faced ancient evils and modern horrors alike. Werewolves in the heart of bustling cities, vampires lurking in the upper echelons of society, demons seeking to break through into our world. And through it all, I never forgot where it all began. That night in the Ozarks, when a terrified man came face to face with a creature out of nightmare. Every life we saved, every monster we stopped, was a tribute to that moment. A reminder that no matter how dark the night, there would always be those willing to stand against the darkness. As I write these words, I know that my fight is far from over. The world is vast and the shadows are deep. But I am no longer alone. And to those who might stumble upon this account, I say once again, be vigilant, be brave, and know that in the darkest of nights, there are those who watch over you. The monsters are real, but so are we, and we will never stop fighting.